Welcome to the Ash Cloud. I'm Ash Sweeting. AgriFoodTech Venture Capital investment is down by roughly 90% from the high of 2021, with the lack of exits or creation of profitable agtech companies resulting from the billions invested frequently taking the blame for investors looking for alternative places to put their money. But there are success stories. Today we are joined by Mike Seeley, the CEO of Native Microbials. Over the last 10 years, Mike and his team has built a profitable animal biotech company. I recently caught up with Mike to hear about his journey and how Native created a product farmers wanted, were willing to pay for, and how they built the manufacturing process to cost effectively produce the product at market scale. Mike, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Absolute pleasure to have you here. So I guess if you think back human history, before about the 1600s or 1700s, without microscopes, we could only see what we could see with our naked eye. So this whole concept of microorganisms was just, uneven, incomprehensible. And then we developed the microscope, and then now over with genomics and other tools that have come about in the last 10 or 15 years, we've been able to understand much more about how huge a role microbes have in basically everything that goes on biologically on the planet. Do you just want to sort of outline how you see microbes fitting into all those different thousands and thousands of things, and the evolution of our understanding of these amazing small single cellular organisms?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so you have to keep in mind that my perspective on it um, isn't earned from technocratic work. It's more just earned or developed from just being around microbiologists for basically the past 15, 16 years, from a professional context. I think if you talked about the arc of the evolution of microbiology technology, I think you missed a period. I think they found, what's his name? The French guy, or was it a Dutch guy? I don't know. Found microbes with lenses, noticed them, little squiggly things moving around. And then somebody else came and developed the bell jar, which was kind of like the first petri dish, the first iteration of the petri dish. So there was multiple steps to get to sequencing. There was like the observation that there's little bugs everywhere. And then there was the step of, okay, let's isolate them and let's play with them. And what are they doing? Let's interrogate them a little bit more. So there's like the petri dish 1900s, early 1900s era. And then there was, I think there's been the PCR Sanger sequencing era, and now we're at more high throughput next generation sequencing, and obviously overlaid with a lot of bioinformatics. And so I think one thing people in microbiology, or whether they have a commercial or an academic interest in microbiology, kind of overlook is, there's a tendency to focus on the omics, like, oh, look at this cool pattern in the microbial abundances across different phenotypes, different states, different environments. Or there's a tendency to just focus on hardcore environmental microbiology, which is like, let's isolate things and do assays and functional assays. Let's play with them and grow them and check out what kind of things they're making. Um, and sometimes the two don't overlap. Like you have these two categories of people, kind of microbiology people, where you're either really good at the sequencing molecular bioinformatics, or you're really good at the wet lab, getting in the mud, hacking together really interesting ways of isolating and assaying environmental microorganisms. And I think what's exciting for me to see the evolution of the industry, or the field rather, is the convergence of the two fields more and more. So, I think that um, for advanced microbiology, and again, this is non-scientist, very much a product sales, product person, customer, focused person. Um, what's for me exciting to see is the convergence of those two disciplines because I think that's ultimately where change will happen and where we'll see the manifestation of next generation microbiology come to life in the economy in our lives. Um, I think there's that's really good to see from my standpoint because that I think is what's been missing from the commercialization of advanced microbiology. Like historically, if you look at like the companies that sell and make and sell conventional microbes, like Lactobacillus, Saccharomyces, those are people that are, maybe more excited, or maybe the original people involved back in the 50s and 60s that were um, excited by microbiology and productizing and commercializing microbiology. Their functional domain was probably very heavily skewed to environmental microbiology because they didn't have computers back then. You didn't have sequencing. You didn't have like data science on environmental microbiology. And so, this amazing microbes as products industry started, it grew, and you end up with yogurts and, uh, bread yeast and things. But, unfortunately, that hasn't changed in a long time. Along comes sequencing, bioinformatics, and you have all these really new talents, forms of talent in microbiology, but they forgot about environmental microbiology. And so you've got like this old established microbe as products industry built upon at this point, certainly in a Kondratiev of winter, this legacy industry, Bacillus, Lactobacillus, very, you know, a modern microbiologist like looks at these things and thinks they're pathetic. I don't think you could not. Um, but at the same time, these are markets that have formed that are large, that are significant. And so now, and then you have these bioinformatics, omics, kind of microbiology people that have now prospecting using advanced methods and now seeing them two come together to now create the next generation so that you refresh the microbiology Kondratiev cycle. You end up in a spring season. I think is exciting as a product person. And I'm sure there's many academics or people studying lactobacillus or things that are like probably want to like burn me at the stake, but I don't care what they think.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I guess the question I've been begging to ask on this is given how technical scientific microbiology is, how does someone with a non-scientific background get to be running a microbiology company? What's the background? What's your story there?
I mean, I'm just man, who was the microbiologist that said chance favors the prepared mind? I would argue that I was neither prepared. I was certainly not prepared. So I don't know if that works all the time. I don't know. I think I come from the Silicon Valley world. That's my background. Um, when I was really young, not young, but basically 2 years out of college, I grew up in and around the New York City tri-state area, nowhere near a farm, a cow. I think we had a pet cat. Um, there wasn't I wasn't a scientist. I'm not, I'm more of a I'm not a scientist. Um, I moved to Silicon Valley. I got lucky. I got to work when I was young. Now I'm 45, but when I'm 23, 24, 25, I got to work for a venture capital fund that did science, deep science investments. Um, it's basically like their grunt, like investment partners would have me do the stuff they just did not want to bother with. and whether it be spreadsheets or stuff, stuff like that. And I got to get exposed to the world of scientists in developing new products through science from a distance. And then, long story short, I ended up meeting a scientist who had started a business called Taxon, which was had um, which was like the pioneer in 16S 16S profiling of microbial communities. And this was like way back. This is a very special scientist. His name is Matt. And I was fortunate to learn from him. He gave me the opportunity to help him try to make a business or support some of his business goals and Taxon's business goals. Um, and and this is back in like 2011. People didn't really call the microbiome then. They just called it microbial communities or environmental microbiology. Um, and yeah, the business ended up, we never got to a stage where it was product revenue generating, but the business was acquired for a lot of money uh, for the technology capabilities, for the platform methodologies. Um, and so I'd say that I kind of stumbled into that through a friend. I got to meet Matt basically through a friend, my friend Mike, another Mike. Um, and I kind of just fell into it when I was, I don't know, 29, you know, and yeah, and then after that happened, however many years that whole thing took place, I met Mallory through a professor at the University of California, San Diego. She had just finished her PhD and she had some ideas for profiling microbial communities that were kind of took some of those base methods that were established at Taxon around correlating the relative abundance of microbes across samples, taking that to a kind of in a different direction, using absolute abundance, using um, transcription, not just DNA, but cDNA, and using some novel bioinformatics methods to try to capture the non-linear phenomena that happens in nature so that when you go to do your associations between the abundances and the metadata, you can resolve some of those ambiguities more directly mathematically. Um, yeah, so that's kind of how I fell into it. I've done other things in microbiology too that, I helped start a microbiology tools company, some things on the food side, and I don't know, I've just been very blessed to work with scientists who, again, back to this, like the arc of microbiology, the industry started with environmental microbiologists. What do you get? You get a bunch of lactobacillus and kind of like easy to grow, sort of like things that are readily growing, not necessarily conducting valuable biochemistry. Then, sequencing bioinformatics comes along. What do you get in the field? A bunch of microbiology data scientists, but not necessarily good at wet lab work. Um, and hopefully the convergence of the two enables the next wave of advanced microbial products, which I believe will likely be, obviously environmental microbial ensembles, consortia, um, things like that.
Because
So
it comes back to a lot of that evolution. We're going from single species of things and thinking that you throw in a single species somewhere and it'll be game changing, to realize that these things are communities and interacting and doing all sorts of and competing and collaborating and all sorts of stuff like that. And so a single species is not gonna cut it.
it's not just that the single species is maybe not that effective because there are keystone organisms in an environment that, like if you have let's say your house is infested with mice, like do you use a polar bear or do you use like a tabby
Yeah.
cat?
Yeah.
Like there's species that can have a pretty big impact um, on a single strain, single species basis on the ecosystem. The it's more about the species themselves that matters. If you most of the environment, the the abundances of microbes in the environment is skewed. So if you take a handful of soil or a swab of skin or a sample of fecal matter anywhere, let's say there's just to keep the math simple, this is not actually the math, but just to provide an example of this for the audience. Let's say there's 100 different things there. 95% or more of the biomass is just 10 things.
Yeah.
And so if you're an environmental microbiologist, like the first wave of people, um, when you didn't know that there was hundreds of things, because morphology doesn't really tell you much, what you manage to grow on a plate probabilistically is going to be the weed. It's going to be the thing that's abundant. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the thing that's driving what we observe.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing the things that add a lot of value. And so, yeah, it's exciting for me to see the convergence of environmental microbiologists and, kind of microbiome data people. And I think that the critical thing for the future of this category, for second gen microbial products, it's not just the environmental microbiology piece, but it's the stack around process development. So there are, um, if you're trying to build a business off of novel environmental microorganisms as products, you're going to not only have to be good at environmental microbiology, not only have to be good at bioinformatics and all of that stuff, but you're also going to have to be good at stabilizing, formulating, scaling microorganisms that are going to likely be much more recalcitrant to cost-effective production. And so, I think that's an area too where there's been a lot of advancement. And so anyway, I don't know. I don't know what I'm
But
saying.
taking a step back from that, because that's all very deep in the science and the natural side of things.
Mhm.
And to microbiomes everywhere. So it's like where do you start in terms of we're going to choose a certain use case that's going to have commercial validity, or we think is going to have commercial validity. We think there's going to be a market that's going to want this product, and then we are going to have to go through all that work, and we're going to have to find people who believe in us enough to keep on funding us to go through all that work. And that's, there's a big nut to crack in all those things, especially when, there's literally probably millions of different potential use cases for
Yeah.
micro products. So I guess firstly, where do you start? And then how do you drive that forward to build a business that's not only raising revenue but is now profitable?
Yeah, I mean, native is profitable now. I think it starts with common sense. There's like a, there's um, there's a tendency, I think, for people, and I would say especially PhDs, to think that, you know, where the lines between reality and hyperbole become easily blurred by, them being smart. And, I think common sense is important. And so when we started Native, um, we don't come from the animal health and nutrition industry. We don't even identify with the industry. We're an advanced microbiology supplier. Um, we were evaluating opportunities or places to deploy and develop products from Mallory's original discovery methodologies. And Um, we kind of looked at markets that used microbes as products. We looked at different industries that used microbes as products, and we said, well, what are the microbes being used? Are they interesting? The idea being that, like, Mallory or whoever, that team can create better ensembles of microbes that are more valuable, and we'll figure out the process development and scale up later. Um, and animal health and nutrition stood out to us because microbes as products for animals, whether you're talking about a cow, a dog, any animal species, excluding humans, at the time, the microorganisms being used were conventional, lactobacillus, dead bread yeast, these very antiquated microbiology solutions. Um, anything that basically came from generation one environmental microbiology. Um, and so we said, look, the people are buying microbes today. They use them every day, but they're using these really silly microbes. Like, why would you use lactobacillus in a cow? I mean, I'm sure if you throw enough research and marketing funding and you're a giant company based in Europe that's been doing it in yogurt for many, many years, you can come up with a positioning to justify it. But from a biochemistry standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, we just kind of looked at markets that were where microbes as products were established, but where the underlying microbes themselves seem to be um, antiquated. Rather than saying something like super hyperbolic, like we are like the greatest sequencing discovery platform on earth, and we believe in a world where no child goes hungry, and like you have all these like visionary, like hyperbolic, kind of like grandiose, like visions of veganism and whatever other nonsense, these idealist kind of yeah, we don't start things that way. We build the product, we try to understand like what are people using today? It's common sense. What are they using today? Is that a microbiology relevant problem? What are the competitive ingredients? Do we think we can make something better? We don't try to build business off of or product lines off of too much hyperbole. I mean, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be sort of crazy,
You have
but
to sell a vision of some sort. It's got,
yeah, but I think common sense is, I think, ultimately um, a little bit of what plays into it.
Mhm. And then the first product development, how long did that take? How,
It was rough.
there,
I mean,
there,
it's tough. People think that, I mean, the business native today is 10 years, over 10 years old. And yeah, the business is EBITDA positive today, but it was rough. It's not just it took a long time because we had to start not just from the product side, but we also had to start from the discovery side. We had to start like this wasn't a technology that was spun out of a university. Wasn't like a thing where a bunch of work had happened over 5, 10 years at like the Broad Institute or something, and that we just got a license. None of that happened. So it was tough. It was a lot. We had to do a lot in parallel, and I think the biggest challenge came when the microbes Mallory wanted, where her data suggested were important. Those microbes were anaerobic, non-spore forming, often in some cases novel genuses, and where there's really no base to reference to how to produce, how to grow, how to do these things. So
that just for everyone's knowledge, that means they're exceptionally difficult to grow. And, just because you've identified something that may be super, super useful, it's like, oh, we can have that. It doesn't mean that there's an easy path from that to actually producing it in a way that it will stay alive and get into wherever it's
yeah,
in the
I mean, there's
target.
been a lot of technical de-risking that's had to happen, but because we try to be product common sense people, we've that's kind of forced us to hire more engineering type minds past discovery than science. I would say scientists and engineers in some ways are similar, but in other ways very different. Scientists are like more interested in discovery, exploration, you know.
Mm.
Both are really good at math and stuff, but scientists are, more, their proclivity is more towards discovery, exploration, and engineers, you know, kind of, in my experience, is more centered on utility, breaking things down to some of their parts and making it useful. And I think that's another piece that I think we did kind of well at Native is having different people that express those creative skills but still work together well.
Mm.
And
Was
I
that a
think,
difficult transition from the mindset of the business to sort of go, okay, we're in it to sort
yeah, of course, it's been difficult for anybody, any company in any world that's trying to develop something new. You have those tensions that'll arise. But um, I think we got lucky in that um, you know, Mallory, Corey Dodge, Sean Gilmore, um, Jordan, Cameron, some of our product people were, both um, open. They're open to being disagreeable, and it doesn't become like a battle for your identity,
of.
and like uh yeah, and I think we're so when I think about second generation microbiology being successful, I think we talked about having good environmental microbiology, good bioinformatics, and now good process development, kind of more engineering capabilities around that. I think what's done a lot of damage to the field, to the category, has been overinvestment because, there hasn't been common sense. If you look at the amount of capital that's been put into the new microbes as products category, there's been an overinvestment, and I think sometimes, I'm not going to name names, and people would say, well, you're overinvested. Natives like gotten too much capital. And it's like, maybe, over 100 million is a lot of money in my world,
Mm.
but it's not 800, it's not a billion, it's not 400. And, I'm a little dismayed that more businesses that have raised significantly more capital are not even EBITDA positive. And so, I really hope that, future entrepreneurs or even people today doing it focus on being efficient and using more common sense. And I think that's another thing that I kind of worry about sometimes is but I think that era is kind of over, right? So,
How was it? Because going back 4 or 5 years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when there was much more money out there for investors, and there were these companies
mhm.
that were selling big stories and um, much more the bigger, grander visions, and having as being I've been aware of what Microbials, my Native has been doing for quite a while, and you always kept your head down much more than many of the other companies. But how was that when there was this big, um, you know, all the events there, all the talking, and to sort of stay the course and keep to your own plan compared to get caught up in all that hype.
I think I don't even if I don't think the hype would have ever come to us, right? Because you got to remember, at the time there was like just a lot of Berkeley vegans running around talking about how the future is cellular, right? You had like people saying preposterous things about how, steak is going to come from steel tanks, right? You had people saying things that, so like even if, which we did not do at Native, but even if we were like, let's go, I don't think we even could have gone after those huge rounds because the area that we operate in it's almost too common sense for, people, trying to, and for investors at the time, people were like, oh, yeah, I remember, you know, just, yeah. So I don't, and I think we just avoided it. I mean, I think it was intentional to avoid. Even if the opportunity was there to raise insane amounts of money, we would not have because we use common sense. Um, it wasn't even there because, the story was too common sense, almost, like, I mean, the amount of money that's been deployed into, I mean, this is the big problem I have with synthetic biology outside of human pharma, is it's really underdelivered commercially. Massive amounts of money has gone towards synthetic biology businesses, and almost none come to mind outside of human pharma that is delivered on a really great product, let alone a great business. And um, yeah, so
Does that go?
there's so many people that are, if they're even listening to this, like for sure hate me right now. But um, yeah, I think.
Firstly, I think all these conversations, they're better off in the open because what's
Mhm.
happened's happened, and people look at the numbers, it affects. If you look at what's invested now in many of these things, it's not what it is. All the money's going into AI at the moment. I'm sure there'll be pendulums and all that sort of stuff with other industries and where investments going in, but it's I think it's very valuable to reflect on that. And the I think going back to the single species, single like the synthetic biology is very much focused on particular genes or particular it's very highly targeted, and then when you start looking at you know the microbiome and the biology of it, there's so many interactions where it is consortia that um have the impact. So you've got how do the complexity of doing synthetic biology across consortia compared to a single targeted area or highly targeted area is
I make a much more simplified, common sense product view of this, which is like boring and not exciting and does not require a black turtleneck sweater, you know. Although I'm wearing a black t-shirt, but that's coincidence. I usually don't. The um if your project requires significant amounts of capital, then it better deliver a significant value to the customer. And synthetic biology has higher capital costs associated with it today than naturally occurring microorganisms.
that's something like a cancer treatment or a novel treatment for a genetic disorder or something like that. Obviously, that value
Work.
to that customer is
The
huge.
average sales price of the treatment is 1,000 times higher, but if you're trying to replace, I don't know, fat or whatever, some industrial commodity with high capital intensive science on the front end, it's more challenging.
Back to the whole evolution of natives process, and
Mhm.
we're talking about how growing some of these microbes that you have in your products are less than easy. But it's not as though, because essentially that's going to be some sort of a fermentation process. So it's not as though fermentation is a new concept that's been going on in, beer, wine, etc. for thousands of years. How how do you see the ability to sort of leverage existing expertise in something as common as fermentation, but then adapt that to something as specific and specialized as what you were doing? Or was it basically blank sheet of paper and starting from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Corey and I'm not Sean, so I don't want to,
Well,
I
then
don't know.
through your lens as the person
Yeah.
who was, you know,
Um, I think it comes back to common sense. Like, okay, your trials indicate that your product has a range of performance of X if you assume you split that value creation 4 to 1, 3 to 1 with the customer, what are the requirements from a manufacturability perspective so that you also can achieve 80% gross margins? Um, the, I mean, if you look at, Native has raised over 100 million since inception, and now we're EBITDA positive. And if you do a pie chart of where that money was deployed prior to being profitable, from a research and product development standpoint, that pie chart would be 80% process development related, 20% fancy schmancy, microbiome, interesting, ooh, sciencey, you know. It'd be like 20% Mallory is Ponce de Leon and like 80% Corey is the shipbuilder. And so, um, but ultimately, Corey or the process development team, they spend a lot of time making sure that the experiments and that the activities um, harmonize and align towards a business objective. That's a short term set of business objectives, not, long-term, grandiose, like, um, um, yeah. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
I mean that provides a lot of insight into the whole process. So yeah, and it's at a level that I can understand. So I'm guessing that
Yeah, me too. I don't.
because there's so much nuance to, and there's so many. It's so easy to get into weeds in
I
some of
would
these.
say it just comes down to people, a culture of being disagreeable, and common sense. And like scientists knowing that they're scientists and the engineers knowing that they're engineers, and then both appreciating each other and knowing where they can add value and work as a team. And not over indexing on science and not over indexing on engineering, but finding a balance um, where it functions efficiently. The mythical man month, the more software engineers you throw at a problem, the longer it takes to solve the problem. Well, the more PhDs you throw at a problem, it'll be the same. You might not necessarily even get to the problem. And so making sure that you have that both sides of the engineering and science domain appreciate each other, I've seen be really successful. And the only benchmark I have is native. Now, I could be wrong, but last time I checked, Native's probably one of the only profitable microbiome companies. There's plenty that make a lot of revenue, but are they profitable? I don't know.
And on that side of things, you obviously have to engage with customers, with farmers initially, because the initial products were dairy, or the first product was dairy. And
Mhm.
you said none of you came from an ag background, from a rural background, or even an animal background. So how was that journey, both from how they perceived you and then how you built the relationships and got to where you've got to now?
It's just more common sense. You get to know your customer, spend time with them, you know, understand what their needs are, try to learn their problems and try to be relatable if you can. I'm very unrelatable to a dairy farmer. There's no question about that. Um, but I think they do appreciate you become relatable when you convey a desire to help them. It's almost irrelevant, whether you have a New York Yankees hat on or, I don't know, a Texas Rangers hat on. Like they don't, if they see you as somebody that's wanting to help them, like any customer, they appreciate that. And so I think it's about spending time and being genuine about wanting to help them through the technology that you want to supply them with. And I think that goes a long way for dairy farmers. It goes a long way for veterinarians on the pet space. And I think, I think we spent a lot of time doing that. Our first, when we started selling Galaxis Frontier in 2000, the first customers we got in the Central Valley were customers that
Then you
I,
started selling it? When did you,
pardon,
when was that brought into the market? Did you,
Galaxis Frontier, I think it was like around 2000, year 2000. Sorry, 2020.
okay, that, sorry.
Sorry.
Cool.
Yeah.
Not
I'm
thought it was
sorry, man.
a bit early. Cool, awesome. And so when you started selling 2020,
2020. Yeah. I was going up there and just like cold calling. Imagine a guy like me showing up on a 10,000 cow dairy farm, trying to talk to them about advanced microbiology. And I would go with a PhD in microbiology. I'd go with Lisa, Josh, Cameron, Mallory, and we were like, hey, let us tell you, give us like 10 minutes of your time to just tell you what we do. And if you don't like it, you can tell us to fuck off. And that was like being very direct, matter of fact, you know, um, and then getting that time one out of three dairy farms would say, okay, man, go. You got 5 minutes, hurry up. And then if you convey passion for what you're doing and what you're working on, they're like, this is kind of interesting. Okay, well, let me think about it. And it's just about being a part of the community, but like really kind of um, just explain to them why what you're doing can help them and be valuable to them. Um, and just, yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
that's in some ways it's that being yourself, being authentic, being passionate, and thinking about it through what
We
it
had a
does.
lot of people, from the orthodoxy. When I say orthodoxy, I mean the folks selling lactobacillus and dead bread yeast today that would laugh at us saying a dairy farmer will never pay 18 cents per cow per day for what you're selling. And here we are, 4 years later, taking their customers with customers paying for the value.
Because it
And
makes it more than
so,
18 cents a cow per day.
yeah, and so it's not like there's this tendency to make assumptions about the customer because it's what you've done or what you've experienced. And in reality, I think customers in general across industries want the best that they can get for their business. And in this case, they're animals. And if the value's there, the value's there. And that's what wins. And so you have to be willing as a microbiology related entrepreneur or whatever to go seed that and spend a lot of time. You can't just sit there in your tower doing science and being the smartest person, in a small crowd. You have to extend that out into the world. And so I think it's important for people doing commercializing advanced microbiology in any industry to spend a lot of time out in front with the customers.
And we're getting close to time. So, but before we go, what's next for Native?
Yeah, natives, people think we're a cow company. We make products for cows. That's not the, that's not really the truth. I mean, we do more than that. We make products for other animals. So we have a growing business on the pet side. So sort of like in the dairy cow side, we've looked at profiled the microbial community of sick and healthy dogs and have found organisms that we believe and know are superior to helping dogs have a strong gastrointestinal system, um, microorganisms that can treat and prevent chronic enteropathy, and some of those associated dysbioses. We make and sell microbes for direct to consumer. We also have customers that buy microbes from us that resell them. Um, we also in that canine pet world, we actually have a drug that's in clinical trials. It's much more of a therapeutic, but it's a consortia of organisms to completely treat chronic enteropathy. We've done a lot of research in poultry and a lot of research in the beef feedlot area. And so we're thinking about how to commercialize those objects. Um, but really for us, there's ongoing research and development in new areas. There's investment into further validating the things that we're going to be commercializing, both in the form of trials, papers, all that stuff. Um, and obviously the required processes for those products, from a process development manufacturing standpoint. But it's really from a commercial standpoint, we're just trying to grow, right? So we have a lot of partners. In dairy, we've announced a partnership recently for distribution for Galaxis Frontier on the East Coast with Premier Select, which is the leading genetic supplier into that territory. And there's a lot of dairy cows in your homeland, it sounds like. Finding partners to bring our products and technology to those other territories, those other regions. And so from a commercial perspective, it's a lot of partnership development, sales channel development, both in dairy and in pet, and then continuing to develop new cool things in new areas like beef feedlot, chicken, um, some stuff in horses that we've been doing. So.
Awesome. And I gather my homeland being Australia, but also I'm sure that there's lots of cows I know there's lots of cows in South America and in Europe and in other parts of the world too. So there's a whole jigsaw puzzle in terms of trying to navigate.
I always have a hard time distinguishing between New Zealanders, like with Kiwis and Aussies. So I'm sorry. I was talking about New Zealand, but
I shall not be offended. That's cool.
all right, man.
But just quickly before we do go, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't already discussed?
I don't know. I don't know if this has been helpful for anybody,
Been
but
fabulous. This has been really interesting.
uh, um, I think it's yeah. I mean, just to get back to something we were talking about, I the evolution of microbiology, like its evolution as an industry, as a product category. Um, we started, like you said, we started with noticing little things moving around under a lens hundreds of years ago, to then, the bell jar, the petri dish, trying to get these things alone and start playing with them. And then we ended up with lactobacillus and Saccharomyces. Um, and that became the status quo. That became like what I view today as the orthodoxy in microbiology. And then we chugged along, da da da, and then we were able to now use sequencing, bioinformatics, a lot of advancements in chemical engineering as well in terms of process development and scale up. And so now, we're now looking down the tunnel at the next generation, where it's novel species, novel compositions of species, maybe byproducts or metabolites, proteins that can tune the distribution of microbial communities in a particular way. Um, and I think, I'd like to see this category be really successful. And, my view is it's the success of the category is much less a function of raising exorbitant amounts of capital and living in a world of hyperbole and dreams, and is really dependent upon being hyper efficient, being product focused, customer focused, and making a lot of sacrifices as an individual, as a team, personal and professional. And so if there's people out there that are entrepreneurial that want to do microbes, you know, and you have that mindset. I'm no expert at this. Native is no mega company, but I can tell you, I think that's the right path. You should be taking that approach. And yeah, I just like to see the category win.
Mike, so thank you so very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for listening to the Ash Cloud. Please subscribe to Ash Cloud if you've enjoyed this podcast, where I will continue to discuss food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental, political, and cultural challenges facing our society and creative ideas on how to address them.